Wouldn't it be nice if instead of you having to approach women, they would come approach you? Well, you lazy asshole, this video is for you. If that's what you want, this video will give you a series of techniques where you can get approached by women at least some of the time. However, there are some major asterisks around this, so stay until the end where I explain in full. But that said, this is how to get women to approach you. The first technique to get girls to approach you is a very old school game idea that kind of has gotten a bad rap, but it does legitimately work. And yes, I'm talking about peacocking. Right? You may have a variety of ideas of what peacocking is, right? Wearing a, pink cowboy hat, a feather boa, 20-inch platform shoes, which I don't think those even exist. These types of things, dressing outlandishly to get attention. Does this work to get you approached? Yes, it does, at least to some degree. However, there are downsides. For example, one way to get approached would be to dress like a clown or a cartoon character or a stuffed dinosaur. However, while that might get you approached, it might not get you approached in a man-to-woman way by your target demographic of attractive women, and it might have them already thinking of you as kind of a sideshow attraction and not as a man they would date. So there's this kind of tipping point with peacocking where it has to be outlandish enough to get attention, but not so outlandish that it puts you in the completely wrong category. But it definitely can be done well and correctly, and I definitely have had experience with doing it well in the past. I haven't actually done full outlandish peacocking in quite a long time, but I did actually do it about 20 years ago, and it did actually work. Some items that I wore that did work very, very well was a pink cowboy hat and or a zebra stripe cowboy hat. At one point had my nails painted black, which is a pretty light peacocking. I did wear a feather boa at one point, which did get attention. The most effective peacocking I ever did for actually getting opens was a neon sign that would scroll messages across my chest. We put messages like, I light a girls, attention whore, or actually the most effective message, weirdly, that we ever found for the sign was kill me. I don't even know why that worked, but I followed the data, so it worked and I did it. And yes, peacocking was effective for occasionally getting approached, and it actually was effective for giving the girl something to comment on during the approach. So you might ask yourself, Todd, why don't you peacock anymore? If this is effective, why don't you still do it? Why did you do it 20 years ago and you don't do now? Well, here's why. Number one, as I mentioned, peacocking will get you attention, but it will also change how the girl views you. And specifically, it will tend to put you in a category that she doesn't see as boyfriend material. It might get her to see you as a fun guy in the club. It might get her to see you as silly experience or something like that. But afterwards, let's say you exchange phone numbers, you're going to follow up with a girl, and she thinks back, she's like, oh, that guy in the chipmunk costume, that was a little weird, right? I'm being a little crazy with the chipmunk costume, but you get the idea what I'm saying. If it's a little too outlandish, she doesn't see it as a legitimate possibility. And specifically, peacocking helps you to have more value in a way. More attention on you, ability to handle social proof conveys more value. What it doesn't do is create comfort. In fact, it creates discomfort and it creates a disalignment between you and the girl's image of a guy she would date. As you get better and better at game, value is less frequently the issue. If you have good game, you're able to get value through other means, but getting comfort back is actually much harder. So it's actually more effective once you're good at game not to peacock. Peacocking could be a useful phase for someone who's kind of intermediate at game and wants to get a little value bump or wants to be able to deal with more social pressure, get into more extreme kind of interactions as a practice step. But once you get to an advanced enough level, dressing outlandishly is actually probably going to hurt you more than it helps you overall. The other issue with peacocking has to do with the reactions you get. Oftentimes, if a girl approaches you, but you're not ready for it or don't know how to handle it, you're not going to do anything with it, so that approach doesn't do much for you. And also, because the peacocking is so outlandish, oftentimes guys who peacock will end up in conversations about the peacocking and only about the peacocking. They'll be 5, 10, 15 minutes in, and all they're talking about is their clothing, their attire, etc. Or that's what the whole subject is about, as opposed to the conversation actually becoming about you and the girl at any point. So you need to have strong enough game for peacocking to work in your favor, otherwise it will backfire. But if your game's really good, peacocking will actually backfire in a different way. So there's this weird sweet spot where peacocking can work, but it is kind of a small sweet spot in game. But yes, it will get you approached. A better strategy overall than peacocking is something I would call peacocking light. And what I mean by peacocking light is dressing overall well and fashionably, dressing cool, but then adding one little extra item that is potentially comment worthy. That way, if a girl does want to talk to you, she can use that item, but you don't look like a clown. You don't stand out to the entire club from a distance. And because you only have one slightly unusual item, which is still fashionable and cool, there's none of this, oh, he's not the type of guy I would date, or oh, I could not see myself with him, or oh, this is completely weird, or this is just like, you know, the party clown experience, the guy I take a photo with and then move on with my night. Some examples of peacocking light. Let's say you're at a formal event where you have to wear a suit, but your suit happens to have a purple tie and a purple pocket square as opposed to being black and white like everybody else's suit. You're still within the dress code, you're still not crazy, you're still very fashionable. In fact, you might have a more fashionable suit than other people, but you're being a little extra colorful with it. You're showing a little bit of extra flair. Another example you might have seen from me personally is I used to do day game while wearing Lululemon pants, a black t-shirt, and then bright pink tennis shoes. Now, the look of wearing that sort of athleisure look with tennis shoes is very normal, is very cool. That's a stylish look that's in right now. But throwing in pink tennis shoes as opposed to black or white tennis shoes is a very different look, and it would get me comments. Now, full disclosure, more often than not, the comments I got were not from hot girls. I'd get random comments from random people. I got a lot of comments from guys wondering where they could get the same shoes, but I did occasionally get comments from girls and occasionally get opened by girls. Also, though, as a bonus, when I actually talked to girls that I approached or in other contexts, I would get compliments on them within the interaction, which would make the interaction go more smoothly or make it go a little more favorably. Now, I'm obviously not going to get approached as often with pink tennis shoes as I would with a top hat and a feather boa, but the attention I'm getting is almost universally positive as opposed to much more negative and occasionally positive. One very simple version of this type of peacocking would be to simply have a good fitting t-shirt, but that has an interesting message on it, or a hat that has a message on it as opposed to just being a hat. That message could be the commentable thing, for example. And the idea here is not that some girl that is not interested in you at all will suddenly be totally enamored with you because you have something written on your shirt. It's more that a girl who might have a little interest but would be afraid to come talk to you or wouldn't know what to say now has a very low investment thing she can say, so she can make a comment and get the conversation started. There are other items that could serve this purpose as well, potentially jewelry, accessories, tattoos. There are lots of examples, but the idea here is it has to be generally cool but stand out just a little bit. So thus far we've talked about various forms of physical peacocking in order to get approached. Let's talk about another technique which I call kind of verbal peacocking. And basically what this is just being kind of loud and possibly even loud and obnoxious in order to attract attention. And a good example of this would be a group of guys talking extra loud, joking, kind of, just making a scene a little bit. And when this happens, most of the time, people look at them and roll their eyes or kind of like take 2 steps away from them because it's obnoxious. But occasionally, some group of girls or just solo girl who's in kind of a partying mood may comment over. They may just yell hey or introduce themselves, or they may yell a shit test over at them, or they may be like, why don't you guys shut the f*** up, or something like that. But the point is, there are girls who will engage with this. And this is a very common thing that groups of guys do that help them to occasionally meet groups of girls. If you were to go out with your friends and have a good time, about just, 40% louder than necessary, occasionally people would comment on that. Occasionally people would engage with you, oftentimes negatively, sometimes positively. And similar to with peacocking, when you get that comment, if you're able to handle it well, then you might be able to turn that into an interaction. You might be able to turn that into attraction. A lot of times, though, you might not, because the attention you're getting is primarily negative. You're going to get more negative attention than positive attention from this, but again, you will sometimes get some positive attention. There are a lot of downsides of this. One might be not getting let into places or getting kicked out of places because people think you're drunk or rowdy or not the people they want there. The other thing, though, is while some people or groups of people may interact with you and maybe even will interact with you positively, a lot of people are going to notice you and kind of put you on their catalog of people they don't want to talk to, right? So let's say there are 50 different people in a bar and maybe there's some small segment that might engage with you. Well, 35 or so out of those 50 are looking over and being like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with them. And if you go approach them later, they're going to have an immediately negative impression of you from what you did before, rather than you starting at neutral. So this strategy can work to occasionally get you approached, but it's very hit or miss, and there are a lot of downsides. So a lot of the strategies we've talked about so far definitely can work to get you approached, but they have some serious cons. This next strategy is empirically good. It is only going to help you. There is no real downside to it, so you may as well employ it. And this strategy basically is to go around trying to make eye contact, basically as much as possible. And ideally, eye contact while smiling or smirking, eye contact in a positive way. And this is actually what a lot of naturals that do well with women but do not know how to do cold approach, this is their bread and butter. This is what they do at a nightclub. So the idea is, as you're moving through the crowd, as you're going through your night, you're checking out girls essentially, and you're looking to make eye contact with them. And when a girl makes eye contact, you don't look away like you're scared that you made eye contact with them. You hold that eye contact, you smile, you even say hi, you do something off of that eye contact. But the fact that you had eye contact before the approach means that it doesn't appear like you did a cold approach. It doesn't appear like you were trying to meet the girl. It appears like it just happened. And again, this approach is absolutely great. This works for a lot of guys who don't do cold approach to get them at least a few interactions with girls in a night. And full disclosure, if I'm walking around a nightclub and I don't have someone I'm actively thinking about approaching, I actively employ this strategy, right? I'll walk around, I'll make eye contact, and then if I do make eye contact and there's a look from a girl, I will open immediately, or I will assess the situation, maybe open when the situation's better a few moments later or whatever. But this is a great strategy. It's one I highly encourage. It's one you should do. And occasionally, when you make eye contact, the girl will approach you. Often, you'll make eye contact and then you'll still have to approach, but the approach will be warmer than if you hadn't already. But again, this is just a good strategy. You should be going about your life willing to make eye contact with girls, willing to smile, nod, or say hi when that eye contact is reciprocated, hoping that they'll approach you because that would be nice, but if they don't, willing to approach afterwards in a way that will be a warmer approach than if that eye contact hadn't existed. This is just a good strategy. You flat out should do it, not only because girls will very occasionally approach you from it, but because it will make your approaches to them much easier if they don't. The only drawback of this technique, essentially, is that it only works to a limited degree to actually get you approached. It's a great technique to do. You should do it even aside from getting approached. But if this is your whole version of game, if all you do is walk around making eye contact and hoping to get approached, you might get approached once a night if you're lucky. It's not going to work that often. You're not going to get a lot of interactions out of it, right? It's better than nothing. You have a better chance of meeting a girl than if you don't go out and don't make eye contact, but it's not a robust approach. It should not be your whole game. Please don't make it so. The next method for getting approached by women, which is increasingly trendy in the 2020s, is to essentially become famous in order to get approached. And there are varying degrees of this. Obviously, being an A-list celebrity, famous actor, famous DJ, famous athlete would get you approached a lot and would get you a lot of notoriety. But there's a lot of other more minor versions now, like being an influencer or having a huge following on social media or those types of things. And then there's also local celebrity, like being well-known, a regular at a particular place in order to get attention there and possibly get approached through that. And this absolutely can work. Being famous will get you approached. The problem is, being famous isn't that easy. There are a lot of people trying to be famous. And in order to be famous, you have to have some talent for it. You have to be a little bit lucky, and you have to work really, really hard, right? Being an influencer of any kind is a full-time job. And I can tell you from experience that it is not easy to constantly have eyeballs on you and constantly be an influencer of sorts. Right? When I go out, I do get approached. Unfortunately, I get approached a lot by guys and not very much by girls. I wonder why. The point is, yes, putting in the effort and putting yourself out there and getting an audience will get you approached, but it may not get you approached by the people you want to be approached by. And also, it may not get you approached that often. And also, it's really, really hard to do. It is a lot of work. It is a full-time job to keep yourself in front of enough people's eyeballs to become famous. I've had a lot of students try varying forms of this, and I would say that for every 100 guys that try to have a great social media and attract women through it, maybe one succeeds, maybe. And the reason for that, at least in part, is that in 2024, it seems like everybody is trying to pump up their social media. Everybody is trying to be some form of famous. So there's a lot of competition out there. The other issue with this strategy is it's not accessible to everyone. Certain people have it a lot easier than others with this. If you happen to be male model attractive, it will be a little bit easier for you in this day and age of a lot of photos being taken. If you happen to be really talented musically, if you're a great DJ or great at an instrument, that may help you to get more eyeballs on you. If you're a great athlete, obviously that's going to help. But for a lot of us that just look pretty average, have average 9-to-5 jobs, and especially don't want to change every single thing in our life to try and pursue fame at the expense of everything else, it's not a very accessible thing. Of the guys I've personally known who have somehow achieved enough social media clout to get approached, most of them had a unique talent of some kind and that catapulted them there, or they've literally invested years of their life obsessively to making it happen. So if this is going to happen for you, it's very, very difficult. And honestly, there are some people for whom it's almost impossible to make this happen. I'd love to tell you otherwise, but honestly, that's just the cold hard truth of social media. One final way to potentially get approached by women is to get a job where women approach you. So for example, if you work at a bar or a nightclub, you are going to run into women and they will occasionally be coming up to you, approaching you because they want something from you or because of the social proof or association with that club. That could work. So aside from working in some kind of staff role at a nightclub, other examples might be working in photography, working in fashion, or working in an industry that is heavily female. All of these might increase the likelihood of you getting approached by women and also would just generally increase the amount of women you're coming into contact with. Some of the most popular attempts I've seen guys make are either become a DJ, whether high level or even low level will get you something, or becoming a club promoter. These are all ways that you absolutely can get more women into your life through your job. The obvious downside of this though is your job is a huge part of your life, a huge part of your livelihood, and you're spending a ton of hours at it. So to choose a job mainly for the purpose of meeting women is sacrificing potentially doing a job you really want to do or a job that might make you more money. So there is a definite sacrifice to making your job associated with meeting women. Also, in a lot of cases, in order to qualify for these jobs, you'd have to have game in the first place, which means you may not even need the job if you can get the job. So I've just outlined for you a bunch of different ways that you can get women to approach you. But as you can see, most of these ways either have limited effectiveness or a lot of drawbacks, or oftentimes limited effectiveness and a lot of drawbacks. So here's what I actually suggest you do incorporating these ideas. Number one, dress well. We talked about the idea of dressing well in general and what I called peacocking light. I highly recommend you do that. Dress well and then dress in a way that is a little unusual, a little bit provocative. This will occasionally get you approached, and the nice thing is there's no real downside. It will also help you when you do approach girls or where you end up in conversations with girls when approaching wasn't even a factor. So it has all positives, no negatives. Absolutely, you should do it. Please dress well. I suggest that every single time you leave the house, you look your best, you look in a way that a girl could find you approachable, and also that if you wanted to approach a girl, it wouldn't be a problem for you. Secondly, I encourage you to actively try to make eye contact with girls as you go through your life. And I encourage you, if you get caught making eye contact, to not immediately look away like you did something wrong. Hold that eye contact, smile, say hello, do something off of that eye contact. Again, this is a strategy that has upside with very little downside. It may occasionally get you approached. When it doesn't get you approached, it may end up in a social conversation where you did a very non-try-hard type of approach and get you more opportunities with women. So again, this is a strategy that has some upside of getting approached, no downside, so you absolutely should do it. But the truth is, even if you do these two strategies very well, you're not going to get approached very often. You will occasionally, and that's really nice. But fundamentally, as a man, you're going to need to approach. Why? Because if you rely on getting approached, you're going to get a tiny amount of male-female interactions coming from it. If you do an approach, you're going to get essentially infinite amounts of male-female interactions. You can create one anytime, anywhere you want. The amount of possibilities that's going to create for you versus going through a bunch of effort to try and get approached, it's just not efficient to base your primary strategy on getting approached. It's much better to do the approach yourself. So the big lesson here is learn game. Getting approached is nice, but it's not a robust strategy. It's not going to fill your dating calendar anywhere near the way you want it filled. Guys who get good at game get 10 times or 100 times the results of guys who rely on getting approached, and guys who get really good at game can even get better results sometimes than guys who get famous. Okay, game is that powerful. I really recommend you learn game as a primary strategy as opposed to relying on getting approached. Finally, we talked earlier about social media, and I mentioned that getting famous would be great, but it's very hard to do because it's very hard to get that many eyeballs on your social media. However, one really great way for a girl to see all the cool things you have going on and to see the stuff that you can share on social media is to meet them first and then share your social media with them. So I recommend getting your social media pretty decent, having it convey a good lifestyle so that after you exchange information with a girl and she goes and stalks you to find out about that cool guy she just met, she sees that you have some talent and you have some friends and you have a cool lifestyle. But instead of you having to constantly promote it and get famous, it's an added benefit after she's met you. Once she already likes you, she finds out those cool things about you and it makes her like you more. And actually having good social media is one of the best things you can do to decrease your flaking, right? When you get a girl's phone number, you exchange Instagram with a girl, that sort of thing. If she looks on your social media and she sees you have a cool life, she sees you're traveling, she sees you're having fun, sees you have cool friends, that's gonna make her much more likely to get on a date with you. So social media can be very powerful, but I recommend using it as a secondary attraction mechanism rather than as your primary method and rather than relying on the girl to approach you because of it. So in conclusion, can you get approached by women? Yes. Should you do it to some extent? Yes. Should you rely on it as your main strategy? Absolutely not, because it's not going to work to a huge degree unless you essentially make it your life. I really suggest you learn game, learn to approach, and then use these other factors as a bonus. Use it as an extra to help you out to make your approach better. So those are my thoughts on the matter. I hope you enjoyed them. Be sure and like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And also in the comments, let me know in the past year, how many times have you been approached by women and what made it happen? I'd love to hear from you on that. All right, see you on the next video. Take care.